The first thing she noticed was the silence, not the kind that came with peace or rest, but the kind that clung to the walls of the mansion like dust, thick and unbothered. It followed her up the stone steps of the Ashworth estate, echoing in the spaces between her heartbeat. Even the creak of her suitcase wheels across the marble tiles seemed too loud, like a disruption to something sacred or broken. Clarabelle didn't scare easily. She was practical, used to cleaning up messes and standing in the middle of chaos without flinching. But the quiet here wasn't empty. It was full of something unsaid. The door had opened for her before she even knocked, by a housekeeper, older and worn, whose eyes barely lifted as she ushered Clara in. No pleasantries, no tour, just a murmured, "Mr. Ashworth will see you shortly," before disappearing down a corridor. Clara stood in the grand foyer, holding her coat in one hand, suitcase in the other. The ceiling stretched 2 stories high. Light filtered in from a tall window above, casting an almost sterile glow over the sleek black floors and white walls. Everything was perfectly in place. Too perfect. No family photos, no signs of life. Just one large painting above the fireplace in the adjoining room, a woman, graceful and golden-haired, smiling with a soft intimacy that did not match the house around her. Clara knew without asking, the late Mrs. Ashworth. She didn't mean to stare, but the woman's eyes seemed to follow her, full of a warmth this house had long since abandoned. Footsteps, then a voice. "You're early." She turned. Daniel Ashworth stood at the base of the stairs, tall and composed in a gray sweater and dark slacks, the sleeves rolled up to his form. He looked like every tabloid photo she'd accidentally glanced at in grocery store lines, impossibly handsome in a way that made him seem carved rather than born. But in person, he was colder, sharper. His expression didn't hold anger or interest, just fatigue. His eyes were tired, hollowed out in the middle like he hadn't slept properly in years. "I thought it best to arrive early. To settle in," Clara said, standing straighter. He nodded once, clipped. "The housekeeper will show you your room. The nursery is on the 2nd floor. She wakes at 7. It took her a second to realize he meant his daughter. "I'd like to meet her," Clara said. "She's at school. You'll pick her up tomorrow. Fiona will leave instructions." Another pause. Then, "We don't do introductions." Clara flinched inwardly, but she only nodded. Understood. He stared at her for another long beat, eyes unreadable. Then he walked away without another word. The room they'd given her was bigger than her last apartment. Cream-colored walls, a large bed with too many pillows, a window that overlooked a frostbitten garden where nothing bloomed, but a single stubborn rosebush clinging to life near the stone wall. She unpacked slowly, deliberately. Her clothes looked small in the walk-in closet, her books foreign on the sleek glass nightstand. She'd taken this job for a reason, a new start, something to anchor her. But standing here, Clara wasn't sure what she'd walked into. She met Fiona properly over dinner in the kitchen, simple food, too quiet a space. "How long have you worked here?" Clara asked between forkfuls. Fiona gave her a tired smile. "Since before his wife passed." Clara hesitated. "Was it recent?" 2 years. Ah, that was all either of them said about it. The next morning, Clara walked the long upstairs hallway toward the nursery. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust. She paused outside the door before knocking gently. A small voice answered, "Come in." The girl was sitting on the floor surrounded by books, her dark hair falling in soft curls around her face. She looked up with wide gray eyes, her father's eyes, and blinked. "You're not Miss Jean." "No," Clara said, crouching to her level. "I'm Clara. I'll be staying with you for a while." The little girl didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. "I don't like eggs." Clara nodded solemnly. "Good. I was planning pancakes." That earned her a small smirk. Her name was Willa, 5 years old, incredibly bright, quiet, but observant. She didn't ask about Clara's past or why she was here. But as the day wore on, Clara felt the child watching her closely, like someone used to being left behind and trying to decide if this one would leave too. They read together in the library. Clara let her braid her hair. Badly. At lunch, Willa told her about her favorite sea creatures and then went silent mid-sentence when Daniel walked through the hall outside. She shrank just a little, not in fear, but as if something had closed around her spirit. Clara watched it happen. That evening, she wandered the halls after Willa had gone to sleep, her feet whispering across the rugs as she explored the parts of the house not listed in the job description. The living room again. The painting. She stood in front of it and studied the woman's face. There was something haunting in her expression, loving but distant. A woman frozen in time, still smiling long after she'd stopped breathing. Daniel's voice startled her. She hated that painting. Clara turned, caught. He was standing in the doorway, arms folded. He looked different in the dim light, less polished. Tired, but not defensive. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "I didn't mean to pry." He stepped forward, gaze fixed on the woman in the portrait. "She said it made her look like a ghost," he added, then paused. "Maybe she was right." Clara didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. He didn't fill the silence either. Eventually he left. The room felt colder when he did. Later that night, Clara sat in bed, the house pressing in around her like a secret. She thought about Willa's quiet resilience, about Daniel's clipped tone and the echo of grief behind his eyes, about the portrait that still watched her from the living room. And she wondered just how many ghosts lived in this house, and how long she could stay without becoming one of them. But in the quiet dark, she also felt a strange certainty. She was meant to be here. Not forever, but long enough to matter, and maybe in time to change something, even if she had to do it one midnight at a time. Chapter 2: Cracks in the Ice. The days that followed moved slowly. Clara adjusted as she always did. The rhythm of a new house took time to learn. The quirks of the kitchen, the echo in the stairwell, the quiet footsteps of a man who moved through his home like he wasn't part of it. She settled into the role with quiet efficiency. Meals at the same time, bedtime stories at 7:30, laundry folded just so. But Daniel remained a wall. Their interactions were minimal, always in passing, always formal. A clipped good morning here, a brief nod there. He rarely addressed her directly, except to ask about Willa. And even then, the questions were clinical, almost detached. Did she eat? Yes. Nightmares? No. Any behavioral concerns? She's 5, not a lab report. That earned her a flicker of something, maybe surprise, maybe surprise, maybe irritation, but no reply. Still, Willa flourished, slowly. She clung to Clara with the quiet desperation of a child used to losing people. Her laughter returned in small bursts when Clara made pancake faces, when they made up songs about sea turtles, when she let Willa sneak marshmallows into their cocoa. But it was also clear how carefully Willa watched her father. Every glance, every movement. She never ran to him, never interrupted. She waited for him to notice her, and more often than not, he didn't. It was nearly midnight when Clara first found him in the kitchen. She'd woken with a dry throat and patted down for water, wrapped in a hoodie over her sleep shirt, her hair twisted up. The house was hushed and dark, the moonlight pouring in through the windows like pale silk. She didn't expect to see anyone, but there he was, Daniel, leaning against the counter, a half-empty glass of something amber in his hand. The bottle, whiskey from the look of it, sat beside him, its cap askew. He didn't notice her at first. His eyes were fixed somewhere far away, in another room, another year. Clara hesitated at the doorway, unsure whether to back out or speak. Before she could decide, his voice cut through the quiet. "You used to make tea at night." She blinked. "Sorry?" He looked at her then, and for a moment the expression on his face softened into something so unguarded it startled her. "You always said it helped you sleep," he added. And then, without warning, "Lena." Clara froze. The name hung in the air like a dropped wine glass. She saw it register in his own face, too late. A sharp blink, a shift in posture, the softness evaporated. She stepped further into the room, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not her." His jaw tightened. "I know that." But he didn't apologize. She poured her water slowly, not looking at him. "Was she a tea person?" Daniel said nothing. Clara turned to leave. As she passed him, he murmured, almost too low to hear, "She always forgot the kettle was on. Burnt 3 of them." Clara didn't respond. She just kept walking, pulse loud in her ears.
The next morning,
The tension between them was thicker than ever. He was already at the table when she came down with Willa. Newspaper folded neatly, coffee untouched. Clara served breakfast without speaking, her smile for Willa only. When the little girl had wandered off to feed the cat, Clara leaned down and said in a low voice, "We should talk about last night." Daniel didn't look up. "No, we shouldn't." "You called me by her name." He turned the page of his paper. I was drinking. It won't happen again. That's not the point. It is to me. His voice was steel now. He finally met her eyes. This isn't personal, Clara. You're here for Willa. I appreciate the work you're doing. Let's leave it at that. It was dismissal, pure and clean. She could have argued, could have pushed, but instead she turned away. Willa, come on, time to brush teeth. Daniel didn't say another word. Later that day, Clara found herself in the sunroom with Fiona, folding tiny socks while Willa napped. The housekeeper glanced at her with something between pity and amusement. You've got the look. What look? The one all new hires get after their first brush with Mr. Ashworth. Clara raised an eyebrow. And what's that supposed to mean? Fiona smiled faintly. You look like you just met the ghost. Clara hesitated. He's difficult. He's grieving. Still? Fiona's smile disappeared. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. Love, especially not his kind. Clara paused, then asked the question that had been circling her thoughts since day one. How did she die? Fiona's hands stilled. There was a long silence. Then, carefully, it was an accident. That's what the paper said. But there was more to it. Always is. Like what? She was ill, not physically, but inside. Lena had storms no one else could see, and Daniel, he worshipped her, couldn't admit she was breaking. Clara let the words settle. Willa remembers her? Bits and pieces, mostly shadows, but she feels it, the sadness in the walls. That night, Clara stayed in her room after putting Willa to bed. She didn't want another kitchen encounter, didn't want to be the accidental confessional for a man who refused to see her beyond the ghost of someone else. But she couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way his voice had softened in the kitchen, the way he spoke her name like a habit he couldn't break. She wasn't here to fix him. That much was clear. But something inside her, something stubborn and buried, wanted to understand. Not for him, but for the little girl who looked for her father in silence, and for herself, who kept walking into haunted places as if she didn't believe in ghosts. Chapter 3: The Quiet Between Us. Clara had learned that intimacy didn't always announce itself. It crept in through the smallest cracks between silences, inside glances that lasted too long, or in the way someone remembered how you liked your tea. And lately, Daniel Ashworth had started remembering. He never spoke unnecessarily. Their conversations were still transactional, clipped at the ends like he feared what might slip out if he let them linger. But his eyes had started to follow her. Not in a possessive way, more like he was watching a film he didn't mean to enjoy. He noticed things. When she braided Willa's hair in the mornings, he'd pause in the doorway, longer than necessary. When Clara read to Willa on the couch, he'd hover nearby with a file in hand, pretending to work, but turning the same page 3 times. When Clara laughed, really laughed, usually because of Willa's unfiltered 5-year-old questions, he didn't smile, but he didn't leave either. Once, she caught him watching them through the library doorway. She met his eyes, he didn't look away, he just stood there as if trying to remember something long forgotten. Still, he said nothing. Willa, on the other hand, had bloomed. Clara had a gift for coaxing out quiet children. She never forced conversation, only made space for it. And Willa filled that space, slowly at first, then all at once. She sang now, always off-key and always loud. She painted sea creatures and gave them tragic names like Coral the lonely dolphin and Edgar the shy squid. She clung to Clara's hand when they walked the grounds. She asked questions about stars and death and where cats go when they run away. Clara answered all of them with gentle honesty, even the hard ones. But Willa still watched her father with reverent distance. It wasn't that he didn't care. Clara saw the flickers, a forehead kiss when Willa pretended to sleep, a hand on her back when she had a bad dream, but his love came out like Morse code, brief, unintelligible blips. He was present, yet unreachable. It made something ache deep in Clara's chest. It was almost midnight again when she heard the familiar hum of the kitchen lights. She didn't mean to find him there. She hadn't been able to sleep, thoughts knotting under her skin. But as she crept into the kitchen for a glass of water, she saw him at the counter once more, shirt sleeves rolled up, glass in hand, eyes shadowed by something older than fatigue. Clara froze in the doorway. This time, Daniel noticed her immediately. He didn't startle, didn't mask it. "You're up," he said. "So are you." He looked at the bottle, then poured a little more into the glass. "Can't sleep." She hesitated. then stepped inside. Too many ghosts? He didn't laugh, but something in his expression flickered. Too much quiet. Clara opened the cabinet and pulled down a mug. I'm making tea. I promise not to burn the kettle. He let out the faintest exhale. Maybe a laugh. Maybe just breath. They stood in silence for a while, the kettle hissing softly in the background. He didn't sit. Neither did she. You and Willa, Daniel said suddenly, you're good together. Clara glanced at him. She's easy to love. She used to be louder when Lena was alive. What happened? He looked down at his drink. The silence stretched until she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said quietly, My wife died in a car accident. At night, she was driving back from a fundraiser. It was raining. Clara stopped stirring her tea. Daniel's voice was lower now, not flat, fragile. They said it wasn't her fault, another driver. But she never should have been driving. She'd been off, mentally. I knew it. I should have made her stay home. Clara leaned against the counter, holding her mug. You blame yourself. He didn't answer, didn't need to. She didn't leave a note, he added, but I think sometimes she meant to. A thick silence followed. The kettle clicked off behind her, but neither moved. Clara swallowed. That's a heavy thing to carry alone. Daniel looked at her then, and it was the first time he truly saw her. Not as Willa's nanny, not as a stranger in his house, but as a woman, as someone real. You remind me of her sometimes, he said quietly. Clara's stomach twisted. Not your face, just something about the way you move, the quiet way you take up space. She hated how part of her warmed at the words, and hated more how they stung. Do you only notice that when you drink? She asked. That broke the spell. His expression closed off. He stepped away from the counter. You should get some sleep. Clara didn't move. Daniel, it was a mistake. Talking. It didn't feel like one. Well, it was. He turned, taking his glass with him, disappearing down the hall like a man late to outrun something. Clara stood in the kitchen alone, her tea cooling in her hands. She wanted to scream, or cry, or both. But she did neither. Instead, she poured out the tea and stood at the sink, staring into the dark garden beyond the glass. She knew better than to fall for someone grieving, someone frozen. But even ice could crack, and she could already feel the ground beneath her shifting. End of part 1. She wasn't supposed to feel this, and he wasn't ready to face it. But something was unraveling. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. That was part 1 of You'll Never Be Her. Things are about to get messier, sharper, and far more intimate. Subscribe or follow to keep reading. Part 2 begins with Chapter 4. It only gets deeper from here.